All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to each of you. Thank you so much for joining and being a part of our live today. So, if you are tuning in for the very first time, my name is Shanika Hallback, and I help churches, small businesses, and individuals get financially organized. Get financially organized. And so, as I like to say, take a moment to click like and share this with someone who needs it the most. We are going to jump right in as I like to do. And if you were with us last week, we started talking about church reserves. Church reserves. What does this mean for churches? How can churches navigate this space as it relates to reserves? And why, right? Why does a church need a reserve fund? So if you missed last week, I want to encourage you to go back and watch the replay. All right. So we talked about what is a reserve. We actually talked about how to calculate a reserve and how to save and even how much to save for a reserve. And so this week, I'm going to build upon that foundation and we're going to talk more about reserves, but more so answering the questions maybe why many of churches don't have this, maybe some of the practical things and ways that you can actually build a reserve. All right. So if you are tuning in again for the first time, welcome, welcome, welcome. So very glad to have you on this journey. All right, so let me try to share my screen. Let me see if the system will allow me to. All right, so hopefully you can see this and hopefully you'll be tracking with me. So this is church reserves part two. Part two. All right, and so we're going to jump right in and I'm going to ask the question. And if you have any questions while we are on this live, I'm going to do my best to try to log in from my phone here to also see if there are any questions. But please, because these chats are for you, it's just not for me to give you information, but for you to ask questions if you are a church, if you're a small business and you know that you're needing help navigating these spaces. So why many churches never build a reserve? Right. I'm going to give you some of those reasons, right? One of those reasons could be not having a budget. Right? Not having a budget. That is one of the reasons why we see churches nowadays not building a reserve. And of course, you hear me talk about budgets a lot, but it really does make a difference as it relates to the spaces that you're navigating, the planning that you want to make sure that you are doing, as it relates to how are you actually planning for events? How are you actually making sure that as a ministry, as a church, you are well prepared for where you're going? And so actually having a budget and making sure that you are stewarding that budget well is one of the ways that you want to make sure that as a church you're planning for it. But if you don't have a budget, a lot of times that's why churches are not necessarily planning for these type of reserves. Now, reserve, as you heard us talk about last week, is not a savings account, right? So you may have your savings account, but your reserves are for emergencies, right? So one of the reasons is also because another reason is because churches may not believe that they even have enough money. I talk to churches all the time and they're like, we're just trying to make ends meet, right? There are some churches that are thriving, that are doing a really good job, but that may be why you haven't planned for a reserve. Every dollar, right, coming in needs to have an immediate place to go. Maybe you lack financial discipline, right? As a ministry, maybe a reserve is not anything that you actually thought about. And of course, reserves is what helps you stay afloat, right? Whenever, so if your biggest donor leaves, if an emergency happens, if there's economic downfall, right? That's what we're talking about. That's what a reserve is for. So if something happens, how long could your ministry how long could it survive? That's what we're answering the question of. And so these are some of the reasons why people don't necessarily plan for these things. Some churches, businesses, they mistake faith over poor planning poor planning. So they will say, "We'll faith it," but how many of you know that you actually need to plan, right? Even the Bible says, right, faith without works is dead. So that means you have to have some type of a plan, even though you have faith. Right. Sometimes we don't. We don't plan for a reserve because we're focused only on today's needs. How many of you know that that's unwise? We've been learning about the end times lately, and we were talking about the wise men and how it is unwise to be caught with no oil in your lamp. Okay. And so focusing only on today's needs and not on tomorrow, right? Of course, the Bible says take no thought for tomorrow, but as it relates to financial planning, you need to be planning ahead, right? And or another reason could be sometimes they have too much debt. And so if you find yourself in any of those places, I'd love to help. But those are some of the reasons why people are not really planning a reserve. Okay. Let's talk about some practical ways to build a reserve fund. So if you're writing this down, this will be a great place you can take notes. Number one, you can budget a percentage of your monthly income, right? Or your monthly budget. So whatever that looks like, you want to look at your particular. We talked in the last week about how do you actually calculate that reserve, and you want to reserve anywhere from 9 to 12 months. It used to be 3 months, but 9 to 12 months in this current economy. So you want to budget a monthly percentage, whether you're taking that off of the income that you have, whether you are, taking that number from another particular place. You want to budget a monthly percentage. We talked about operating expenses and what that looks like last week. Number two, you want to save a year end save from your year end surpluses. Sometimes during the holidays, you will have extra giving or donations, things like that. Number three, special offerings. Number four, you want to reduce unnecessary expenses. And number five, you want to redirect unexpected gifts. So when people are actually giving, you want to have a plan for unexpected gifts. So let's talk about how you want to include the reserve in your savings budget annually. And so what that looks like is you may have a monthly budget and then there may be a surplus, right? You want to include whatever that amount is you decide inside of your budget as a reserve fund. So what's scheduled gets funded. Okay. So just like you do your auxiliaries or your different funds that you have in your church and or your business, you want to put that reserve in there as something that you are saving towards. And so if you were to do this second one where you save at year end, and actually for the percentage, it could be weekly. Let's do that. If you want to do like a 2% every week, 3% every month, those are things that you can kind of plan for. So if your weekly giving, say, or your monthly giving is $10,000 and you say you want to take 5% of that, or 5% of however much your giving is at the end of the month, then you would reserve, if it's 10,000 and you decide on 5%, you would reserve $500. So that's how you could do something like that. All right. And so for your year end surpluses, though, your year end surpluses. So if you manage your expenses well throughout the year, maybe you have a surplus at the end of the year, and maybe you say, we'll take that surplus and we'll put it in as a reserve. You can actually do that on a quarterly basis as well. All right. Special offerings, things like that. That can be a part of what you say, hey, we want to put 20,000 or 10,000 in a reserve. So we're going to do a special offering for this particular thing. It's almost similar to what we call a building fund. Okay. It's similar to that. All right. Reduce unnecessary expenses. This is always a big one because I help individuals with budgets, and all the time, I cannot tell you, I'm able to save them hundreds of dollars. And I mean, probably by the second or third call, just because there's so much unnecessary spending. And so you've got to look at your expenses and really ask yourself how much of what we are spending is actually necessary, how much is actually unnecessary. And so when you start to reduce those unnecessary expenses, you're going to have more money for your reserve. All right. And then we talked about the unexpected gifts. So those are just a few ways that you can navigate if you are one of those ministries, businesses where you don't feel like maybe you're not making enough, maybe you're not bringing in enough, or maybe you are, but there needs to be some intentionality around how much you are reserving for those emergencies. And again, reserves are to ensure that if there's an economic turndown, if your biggest donors leave, if something unexpected happened, you have expenses, that you're not in a panic. Okay, you're not in a panic. This is financial freedom. This is financial organization. This is financial planning. This is financial preparation. And just like with anything, as you know me by now, you want to make sure that you're stewarding what you have well. Okay, and that's my job to help you do that. All right, where does your church need to actually keep these reserve funds? All right, where does your church need a reserve fund, or where do you need to keep these reserve funds? Usually, you can keep it in a separate savings account. You can keep it, y'all, y'all pray for me with these presentations. Give me 1 second. All right, here we go. I think we're back on track now. My goodness. Let me share my screen again. Not only do these presentations so y'all can have something, right? But I'm usually using my notes. All right. So again, where should the reserve funds be kept? Separate savings accounts, right? And so when you're looking at your savings accounts, from a financial perspective, they are not really high interest yielding. So you want to really think about how much you're putting in there and how much interest you're getting on just having that money to sit there. You want to go more so with a high yielding savings account of some sort. And so you want to work with your financial institutions, your banks, wherever you're going to be keeping that money to see what the best option is for you. Money market accounts that works. They usually have a little bit better interest rates, and then you want to keep it separate. This is the biggest thing, keeping it separate from your daily operations. Okay, so if you see me looking over, I got my notes over here for you, but separate from your operations. So you don't want to keep these reserve funds in the same account that you're doing your operations out of. That's not okay, because you run the risk of overspending, or you run the risk of, not managing your operations budget as well. So if you mix those funds, um, it's easier to spend. So that's why you want to keep it in a separate account, and you want to work with your financial institutions to see which account is the best for you. Okay. All right. So when should churches use reserve funds, right? When should you use reserve funds? Again, a reserve fund is not a savings account, right? So your savings account, you can save that for a particular reason. This reserve fund is something that you sit aside, and you don't use it until you actually need it. And these reserves are for emergencies, major unexpected repairs, like something happens, God forbid, and you have to repair the entire roof, right? That will be something major. Temporary given declines, right? We've seen a lot happening in the economy as a result of a lot of the different things that are just happening in the world today. And so sometimes you may need to use that reserve if you see a significant drop in giving where you're not able to cover your operations, natural disasters, and then major ministry crisis. Okay. Those are some of the ways or some of the reasons why you should use it. All right, so what happens, and I'm going to go back here. What happens if your church does not have a reserve fund, right? You can delay ministry opportunities, you can accumulate debt, you may even have to cancel some programs. If you have staff and employees, you could be at risk of laying them off. It can create financial stress, right? And so that's why for me, finances is absolutely a ministry, because when you're financially free, it's just a level of peace and freedom that you walk in, right? And then what happens when a church does not have reserves is that you make decisions out of fear versus making decisions out of faith and making decisions on good financial data. And so you want to make sure that you do not find yourself in this place. And I'm going to read this. A reserve fund is not about hoarding money. It is about creating financial stability so that when challenges come, the church can continue to fulfill its mission without panic, without debt, without disruption. The question is not whether a crisis will come, but if it does, as a ministry, as a church, as a business, are you prepared? And so this is a very important topic. I want you to take this back to your ministries. I want you to take this back to your businesses. And I want you to have a really good look at your plan, your financial plan to say, are we planning well? Do we have a reserve? Nobody feels like they need a reserve until you need a reserve, right? Some people do because you're a good financial planner and you know that reserves are important. But most of the time, people do not think about these things until you actually need it. And right. And so it's just like insurance. You need insurance. Nobody expects for anything to happen. But if something does happen, then you have what you need. You have what you need. And so this is what a reserve allows you to do. It allows you to have what you need. It allows you to be able to not panic, and to make sure that you are prepared for all things. And so as you are navigating this space of being financially prepared, as you are navigating this space of ensuring that you are stewarding your finances well, I want to share how you can do that. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, we need help, I want you to scan this QR code on your screen. I want you to send us an email. We would love to chat more with you. You can schedule a 30-minute counseling session with me, and we can walk through your financial health assessment, see where you are and see where you need the most help, not only for reserves, but this is day-to-day operations, day-to-day budgeting, day-to-day accounting. These things are important, okay? They are absolutely important. Absolutely important. And so I want you to hear me. If you need that information, you can go back and pause this as you watch the replay if you're watching the replay. But I want you to know that we are called to steward what we have in our hands well. We are called for strategy. We are called for multiplication. We are called for increase. And so as you manage what has been given, like that one talent, that two talent, we don't want the Lord to come back. We don't want Jesus to come back and he's like, where's the return on my investment, right? I gave you this. Where's the, and if you are one of those ministries that are just kind of at the point where you're like, I don't know what to do. We don't have enough funds. We're looking to try to increase those funds. Scan the QR code. Make sure that you come and talk with me so that we can help you get financially organized and help you strategize for your next level. All right. Again, my name is Shanika Hallback. I help churches, small businesses, and individuals get financially organized. And you have homework today. Once you leave from this live, I want you to make sure that you go and you look into see if you have a reserve fund. And if you don't, let's start planning. Talk to you soon.